All right, we are back with Who's Saying Grace, Season 1, Episode 3. And if you haven't watched The Last Kingdom on Netflix, you need to go do that right now, but not with your kids.
Nope.
And I think I said that in the last episode. I did not say that in the first one, but this is not a family-friendly show, so do not watch it with your kids.
Right.
Go watch it and then get back here and listen to the discussion about grace. Because we're going to talk about grace. We're going to talk about how we define grace and just how it affects us, why it's really so important to us in our lives. And then after you listen to our discussion, I'm pretty sure you're going to want to go back and watch the show again because, oh my gosh, these writers, they do such a good job with the reality of this script. And these actors, they have to know, they have to have had some real life experiences of what this show kind of portrays because they act these parts out so well. And I know it's a script, but they do such a phenomenal job at really making you believe that they believe what they're saying. And I don't think I would have ever caught some of these things on my first time through. I mean, we have watched this show so many times. It's pretty embarrassing.
Like twice.
So I'm not going to say how many times.
Like twice.
But it's so awesome how when we go back through and you really get keyed into their facial expressions,
Oh, so good.
all those nonverbal communication, it is just so spot on, you guys. You have to go and rewatch some of this.
Totally agree. Absolutely. And in the third episode of the first season of the Netflix show, The Last Kingdom, keep plugging in, you guys, we noticed there's a theme through this whole episode, which made us maybe kind of say, maybe we should take a different approach. So instead of looking at 3 scenes, where we'd like to get in discussion on how some of these characters deal with this big change that's going on in this episode. And it also shows their personalities, how they would deal with life, what their goals are, and their purposes at this time. So I would encourage you to, while you're listening, maybe think about how the characters might represent people in your life or maybe yourself, because that's the whole point of this podcast, is to take the podcast, to take the show, or whatever show we're talking about, and take on grace with it, and just keep making sure that we're relating those. I just remember somebody saying, I want to hear about the characters, I want to hear about you, how it relates, like that real life stuff. So we can get lost in the show, but I also want to make sure we're, hitting on how that's so much like us, like you said.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's our total goal for all of this. And yeah, I see with this whole episode, what kind of stood out to me, that overall theme, like you were talking about. Let's just first kind of set this up. So we see this situation where they're coming back from battle, the king is dying, and spoiler alert, the king dies. And so now they have to get a new king. And all the things that they have to do to get that figured out, how they're going to elect a new king, not really elect him.
Quote unquote.
And keep the land, keep everything intact like it had been under that king, how they're going, what that's going to look like under a new king.
Right.
And everyone is really just manipulating the whole situation. I mean, all of them. They're all out for what they believe is the right way. And then they put that spin on it. They either, the Saxons call it God's way. They think it's all God's will, or the Danes or the pagans, they do it the pagan way. And it's really comes down to everyone is just manipulating it to be their way.
I know. I just laughed. Sorry, side note, but you saying elect, like I'm like picturing them voting with a piece of paper in a box. Like, let me get my quill out.
Right.
Sorry. But you're right. We see all these characters: Uhtred, Beocca, Alfred, Breda, Ubba, Guthrum, Athelwold, Aleswith. Aleswith. See, you can't even say them in a row. Leofrich.
Yeah, you sound like you're just like naming off all your children, like calling them to dinner.
Get over here, Guthrum. Do not take that toy from Aleswith. And don't let her hit you. Yeah, these are going to be my kid names. So
we're bringing it back. We're bringing back the names.
Yeah, you can have Abba. But yeah, they're all walking their own path and their way of life. And at the end of the day, again, they're like us, searching for freedom, direction, and connection. And that's why we think grace is the answer. It really helps us truly find those things. And sometimes we try to accomplish it by having control and wealth and power, or maybe you're a person with structure and rules, or trying to find just an easier way of life, control and being right. The difference and of those and like the different ways we choose to do life according like by our personalities and our desires, that I feel like is what divides us. And that's okay, because it's giving the people the freedom to do that and to work it out in their timing. And that's grace. And that is what unites us. Right?
Yeah. It's okay. I think it's okay when their choices don't hurt us. But again, when people choose to hurt others, I think we talked about this in a previous podcast, but when others seem to get hurt by people's choices, that's where, we have these questions. And I see some people, they do want the overall goodness and they want peace for humanity. But not everyone is like that. And I think some of those characters like Sven and Kjartan and Uhtred's uncle, they are super selfish people and they hurt a lot of people. They do a lot of damage. And there's just not much good humanity there. And I can't see that they ever want the best for humanity. So how do we deal with that? I mean, how do we show grace?
I'm going to say, like I know a lot of us have this in our lives. All of us do. When we see people behaving like Kjartan, Uhtred's uncle, and they're not doing anything for the greater good. But maybe this is how we deal with it. This is how we use grace. But maybe they need to work through a lot of trauma. You see people that I know I still have trauma on certain things. And maybe it's childhood trauma, or, there's not like a scale of how bad trauma is or whatever it is. A trauma is a trauma and it affects us. And it affects how we act in our environment. And then it's just molded us, right? And so we see it in it's real-time life, and people's traumas affect us. And I think that's the answer to it. I think it's their trauma affecting us. And I think what we forget about that grace. Because
I think it's hard.
It's
hard to let people work through that when it hurts. And I think we can still have those boundaries because we're not just a doormat. We don't let people just walk all over us. We can turn the other cheek and move on. Right. It's not saying we just stand there and continue to allow them to keep hurting us. We give them space and then we keep moving forward. Yeah. And I think people have to possess a lot of humility to do that. You have to be pretty humble to listen and to want that peace and overall goodness for humanity. And really our number one goal as spiritual beings under who we believe in, the God of creation, is to be loving and charitable. And charity is truly wanting that for people, wanting the very best for other people. And you can want the best for people, but it's what's best for them, not what you think is best for them.
Right.
So I don't think you can want what is best for others if you aren't humble, if you're not truly looking at the situation through the other person's eyes. Like it's always said, you need to walk a mile in the other person's shoes, and that's really hard to do. We have to be truly humble to do that, to listen to others, to understand them. You don't necessarily have to agree with them, but you have to be open and honest and truly hear what they're saying and see them for who they are.
Absolutely. Completely agree. And I mean, do you all think like that? It's hard. Do you listen to others? Like when you're having these conversations, as soon as you started talking about that, I'm like putting myself in, I have a company. I think I've established that, but I have to put on an HR hat sometimes. And the employees will come to me with something, usually it's about another person. I mean, when we're dealing with that, because working with other people is hard when you're dealing with those things. And they get so frustrated because they'll go, well, let's stop for a second. Let's see where this other person's coming from. Where are you coming from? Like, it's not always about what's happening right then and there. It's often so much, deeper. And if you can't get to the place with wanting, with like, if you're just wanting everybody to see it your way, that's not going to work, right? We need to see it from all angles, like you were talking about walking in their shoes and seeing other things. And I think if we pull it into the episode, this is Uhtred. Right now, it might change later, but right now, he's young and immature, and he's focused on his own goals, and he's not very charitable. But
No.
you can see that glimmer of hope, right? Yeah?
Yeah.
And I think he deep down, he wants that wealth and land. He wants an easy life. He wants Bebbanburg. And he's not going to listen to Brita or Alfred or Beocca, and it's on his terms. And there's a scene where Alfred is being crowned, and you and I saw this scene very differently when we first started talking about that. And I found that interesting because, you know, you could see it as, pardon me, I'm so sorry. You could see it as he is, okay, let me set it up. Brita is watching Alfred, and we know Brita is not a fan of Alfred, right? So she's kind of rolling her eyes, and she leaves the ceremony. And Uhtred's presented with a choice. Does he stay, or does he go after her? And we see him leave, and then they're like basically getting it on, and you can see the ceremony happening behind it. They're kind of hidden, but like not. And so with that, you can interpret that a few different ways. Like maybe he's torn about serving Alfred and keeping Brita happy. So he's like, I better go to her. Or he is, you know, he's trying to play it safe and keep the peace and like, okay, I'm going to like, you know, I'm just going to play this out and use both of them to get what I want. Or is he just like completely selfish and he's horny and he's like tearing the shirt off and he's like, whatever, I just want this and I want this woman. I mean, I know he says to her in that moment, like, you are, you know, my girl and this is it. Right.
Yeah. But like you said, I know that you've said before too, that you think that that's that moment where he is kind of choosing her. But I also want to say, who does that? Who tears people's shirts off of them? I mean, seriously. And back then, I don't believe it because you couldn't just go to a shirt store. You weren't just you couldn't get a new shirt just at the, you know.
She better she better be having a good seamstress, a good alterations person, or she better.
I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah,
but that's a really good example. And I think so. Let's keep going. It makes me think of more characters here. So let's keep moving forward with this. We got to talk about righteous boy Alfred.
We've deemed him righteous boy.
And
right?
in this whole scene of him, you know, his crowning ceremony, he gives off such an aura that he is this great humanitarian. His intentions are always put forth as just really wanting the best for his people. And he does what he must and not what he wishes. And he's God's king. And that then makes me think of, you know, they're all saying he's God's king. And that makes me think of King David in the Bible. And David is described in the Bible as this meek and quiet man of God. He's not seeking glory. And God chose him out with all the brothers. Yeah. David was the one that was picked. And then ultimately he's going to unite Israel. And Alfred, his whole goal is to unite England. And I think Alfred wants to be seen like David. He wants to be that holy, righteous God's king.
Yeah, I see that completely. I love how you related those together. So I'm going to ask this question, like, because this is what frustrates me with just in general in life. I mean, we still have it going on. Like, what makes someone God's king? Like, why? First of all, why do we have royalty still? But what do people think? Like, people think that God chooses. Like, God chose David. God chooses the Pope. I mean, we can go to God chooses my spouse if we're going that route. So, and in this show, I find it interesting because normally choosing a king it's just succession, right? So the daughter, the son, the firstborn is the rightful heir to the throne. But since Athelwold is such a doofus and nobody wants him to be king, I mean, even I think he's King Aethelred too, which gets confusing. But before Alfred, he was like, no, not my son. Nah, I'm choosing you, Alfred. And everyone knew that Athelwold would be a bad idea. So they manipulate the quote unquote system and they change it, and what do they call it? God's will. Is
God's
Alfred?
king.
Yeah, is Alfred really God's king? Is he?
Right. We get it so confused because God did have chosen kings in the Old Testament, and God did choose those people. He chose, first of all, Saul. Saul was the first king of Israel, and then David, and they were God's king. But God has not been doing that since Christ. I mean, Christ was that final king for Israel. And God did that for a purpose in the Bible. Saul was made king because Israel wanted a king. They wanted to be like the other nations. And God, that wasn't God's plan for them. But he was like, okay, Israel, you think you're so smart. You want a king. Here's your king. Since you won't believe me when I tell you this is not going to work, I'm going to let you figure it out for yourself. And that's how it usually works, right? I mean, we're parents. When we are trying to teach our kids stuff, we want them to learn from our mistakes, but they do it so much better when they learn from their own choices and their own mistakes.
Well, it's hard to watch.
And it's hard. It's hard to watch but at least when they're children, they kind of do it under our protection, and we want them to figure that out before they become adults, and it really matters. And so we have to let them make those choices, and God kind of treated Israel the same way. Israel was God's children, and so he let them make that decision under his protection, and hopefully they learn from it. Not sure that they did, but hopefully they do. And we just know we learn better from our own mistakes. And again, Uhtred and Alfred, they're going to have to make mistakes so they can learn. I mean, they're so hard-headed.
Yeah, kind of. You just like maybe now, but you just said so much right there. I love it. Why can't we learn from other people's mistakes? We don't. I mean, we still have royalty, like I said. Don't understand it, but we have to go through the hard stuff. So is that why we just keep having to go through it ourselves? But God is not doing this directly, right? He is using grace, and he's giving us free will to make our own decisions. There's our mission right there. And in our own ways, we're doing this, but according to we just keep doing it our own way. And we do it with our own personalities, and we do our thing, and then we make a mistake, and guess what? There's that consequence. And we change our ways, and we don't, and then we have a good choice. I mean, it's just, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's that same thing we kept talking about in the beginning. I think it was maybe one of our first or second episode. It was the consequences and the choices. You make the bad choice, this is going to happen. You make the good choice, this is going to happen. And we want to make good choices that benefit us and more people. And we can see, I think if we use the examples like the characters, like Sven, Kjartan, Abba, Guthrum, like look at their choices and the consequences to that. And then what are Alfred, Beocca, Uhtred, their choices and the consequences to that. It's just
right
there.
So let's look at Alfred and his personality and his choices.
Okay.
When in this first, from the very get-go, when he is told, when they're coming back from war, from the battle, and he's told that the king is not going to survive his wounds. Spoiler alert.
Yep.
And so Alfred, says right away, we shall pray and we shall see. And he seems to be really true to his faith, and he's really wanting the best for the people. He's righteous in all of his actions, and it looks pretty good. And then we turn around and he's caught with this woman who's he's supposed to be resisting. And he's so, it's painful for him because he doesn't want to be a saint. He doesn't want this, burden he has to carry. He can't continue to keep up the charade. And Beocca says, let's pray. He goes to prayer with Beocca, and he's like, why does it have to be a sin? And then this just takes us back to, why are we always trying to master the sin? We just need to admit that we can't do it.
Yeah.
It's not just that one time. We admit it once and then we can miraculously beat sin. No.
Good luck.
We can't ever do it. So, okay, what's the next step? Then if we can't master it, then what do we do?
Mm-hmm.
And if we look to the Bible, Romans 6 answers this question very well. It's like, how should we live? You know, what shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Do we keep sinning so that we can get more grace? God forbid. Instead of having that baby Christian thinking, we need to level up. We need to stop trying to be sinless and just thank God. Thank Him that He provided a way for us. And now there's greater work to do. We have this higher purpose. And I think we can go to 1 Corinthians 13 and see how that plays out, because it talks about, and everybody should know, most people know this chapter, it's the faith, hope, and love, or better, faith, hope, and charity. But the greatest is charity. You have faith in Christ's blood on the cross that deals with your sin. You know now that you have eternal life, and that's the hope part of it. And now you can help others understand that faith and hope, and that's the charity part.
I love that.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Of course we all love 1 Corinthians 13. That's like, yeah. Got that on my wall, I'm sure, somewhere. Okay, now you were talking about Alfred, and he's the king, right? And saying he does want the best for people. But we see Alfred struggle with the burden of the crown in a different way, too. He says he can only do what he must, not what he wants. And he wants his women. I know I'm kind of reiterating what you said, but he wants his women. But how can he be God's king wanting that? And that's probably in his head. And so he portrays he wants the best for people, but he really wants his cake and eat it too, because he's human.
Right.
We're all human.
And that's another great example. If you continue reading on through Romans, the next chapter, Romans 7, you know, we start to understand grace in Romans 6. And then like Alfred, you know, he understands this new position as king, but he still struggles with what he wants as a man. And so Romans 7 talks about that struggle. It, you know, it's so funny because it's like, why do I do what I know I shouldn't do, but I don't do what I should do? I mean, word for word out of the Bible, that's what it says. And it portrays that war in our body and our mind. And our mind knows that we're saved by grace and that, you know, now we need to level up and just love people. But we're human. We still want that wealth and that fame and that easy life. We want it all. Oh, wretched man that I am. But we can have peace. We really can. And you continue reading in that chapter, and it talks about how we can align our actions with our mind. But it's that mindset. It's renewing your mind to understand, to be fully immersed in that grace that is promised to us. And the more we understand that, our actions are going to follow it. Our body will act out what our mind knows to be true. And we just need to continue learning and growing, and every experience that we have kind of solidifies that understanding.
Yep. Totally. It's good stuff. We're always going to church. Sarah's always taking us to church. Thank you, ma'am. Okay. Another scene. We know Alfred's king, and he's got a mission. And he wants England to be one. And he wants peace. And he has got all this support, right? And he's got a team of people who help him. He's got a team. And that's why he gets to move forward and towards these goals and remain in power. It's not just him and his, you know, desires, and they keep him in power. And he often, in many times, he has the upper hand because of all this support. Like his warrior, Leofrich and Lord Otta, they keep Athelwold at bay. And he has Uhtred, who gives him the upper hand because Uhtred's got insider information about the Danes. He knows how they work. So we've got this scene. It's like one of the first orders of business is to make peace with the Danes. And I want to talk about this scene because there's so much. It's just like, you know what? Best scene ever.
Best scene ever. You love it so much, don't you?
Okay, so first, and we also have to just David Dawson, who plays Alfred. He's so awesome. He has, I'm calling it poker face, but he's just so even-keeled, and I love that. So he's going to have a meeting with Guthrum and Ubba to negotiate peace. And he offer, you know, they start to talk about this offer. They're in this tent, and they're talking back and forth, and it's very, it's very Dane and very Saxon. It's very raw, and then they're
very tense.
Yeah, and they're each their personalities, and they don't like the offer that Alfred's given them because he wants them to leave. He'll give them resources and stuff to help them, but he's like, go. And they're like, no. And they start like getting mad and overthrowing stuff. And he's like, we're going to take it all. And Alfred remains calm. And he's like, go ahead, take them all. How many have you taken to date? Like, how many do you have right now? And he looks, he goes, how many do they have?
None.
None. They
Absolutely
have
none.
They have taken exactly none. So Alfred, he knows they're not going to do anything because they don't want to lose men. And they're not going to attack because of that. And they're not going to, they're just not going to sacrifice. And so I love that. I love that this scene just shows, though, like all the people behind Alfred. It's not just him. And you've got, he just relies on them.
Yeah.
Right?
Also, in this scene, I love it because it talks about the written word again. And we go back to, in that first episode, that's, it started there when Beocca is talking to Osbert, a.k.a. Uhtred, and they're kind of arguing about the importance of writing and being able to write it down and being able to read. And at this peace meeting, they've got this guy there that's writing down everything that's being said. And Guthrum is like, what is he writing down? He wants to know exactly what the truth that's being written. And Alfred wants to make it very apparent that he is in control of that written word. And it will be noted that Alfred was the king who asked for peace. And because of the written word, that's all that's going to be remembered of this. And Alfred has that control over it. And so Guthrum's got to put his 2 cents in. He's got to manipulate. So he just simply says, tits, ass, hump, turd. I'm like, oh my gosh. Junior high much.
I wonder if they really wrote that down and then we could read that back in a history book. See, no.
Yeah.
But those words, you know who else likes
Rachel,
those?
These aren't real people.
Okay,
this is just a show.
Sorry. Who else likes those? That makes me, when you say those words, ass, tits, humping,
who do we think of?
Who do we think of, everybody? Maybe Athelwold?
Athelwold? We don't like him.
Sarah's favorite. She loves him. We saw him in another show and she loved him in that too. Wait a minute. So a couple great scenes about Athelwold that really show us who he is and how he's regarded by the people are he tries to manipulate to be king. That's what because he's in succession. It should be him, right? And his life is just about drinking ale. His dad was always trying to get him to, come on, let's get it together, buddy. He knew he wasn't going to give it to him, but he's like trying. Maybe last minute, maybe he can pull it together. But no, he's just going to figure out what he's going to drink and who he's going to hump. And Leofric and Ada, as I mentioned, they threatened him because they know Alfred's the better choice. And the first scene, is we see him waking up in what looks like some sort of pig pen, or I don't know where it was, but it was on a hay bed something. And he's like clearly had sex. And the woman he had sex with is like, she's washing her crotch in this like trough of water, and then he goes and splashes that water on his face. Like, gross.
Dumps his whole head in it.
Yeah, that's gross. Yeah, he did, didn't he? She's splashing, he's dunking, and then they're throwing pee off I'm like, how does everybody... No wonder everybody was sick back then. Goodness gracious. Thank God for plumbing. So, he's just a pain, and he's just so not... He's a disgrace. And they banned him. They tried to send him to the monks. But this next scene, he's clearly come back, like escaped or something. And he's sitting at the table while Uhtred and Leofric were having a conversation about Alfred. And eventually Uhtred looks at him. He's like, Alfred should just kill you. And he's like, God will not allow... Ethelwald says, God will not allow it. I like God.
Of course you do.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So he's basically got this path that he thinks he's invincible, but he's swarmy and he's just, he wants to get his way, but his choices, we're going to see, may not make it such a great thing. But grace allows him to do this. He's going to go down. He's going to have his bad stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Ethelwold may like God, but there is no one who loves God more than Aleswith. Can I just say, we need to talk about Aleswith.
Yes.
We need to talk about the queen.
Queen bee.
And she uses God in any way, shape, or form that she can to manipulate the situation. I mean, she loves this position as the revered queen.
Mm-hmm.
She eats up the admiration that women give her. Like, she knows that she is the top dog.
Yeah.
But she doesn't like Brita because Brita challenges her on this. And she does not like that. She does not like that.
Well,
So
Brita's a heathen. She's a heathen.
Right.
You know.
So she's got to cast some pretty fierce judgment against Brita because she's got to put that woman in her place.
Yes.
So they have this very strained relationship. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of competition. And we see the scene where they're at the peace treaty and Aleswith and Brita are there. And Aleswith says to Uhtred, why is she here?
Yeah.
Why is she even among us, this heathen? And Uhtred's like, she's my guest. And Aleswith has to get that last dig in there. And she says, well, you should have taken the king's offer for a real wife, a lady. I mean...
Ouch.
Ouch.
That face, Eliza Butler
man.
is so good. Her facial expression
she is
when
so
she
good. She
daggers
plays it off
Brita.
so well.
Yeah.
Daggers. And she's this, later on we're going to see too how fierce of a mother and protector she is of her children. I mean, she will do whatever it takes to protect her kids. Mm-hmm. And she's also that protector for Alfred. She will do whatever it takes to keep him safe because he's her meal ticket. I mean, he's the one that is giving her that place as queen. So she's got to manipulate all of that Christian theology to make sure that Alfred stays in his position so she can keep her position. And, she's got to pull it off. And I don't know, I don't think she's consciously really manipulating, maybe a little bit, but I think she really does believe the things that she's saying because that's just what she knows. Mm-hmm. That's all she's been taught. So she just does what she knows, she just does what she's always been taught. And then the best part is at that treaty, at that scene, we get our first real praise hymn with Aleswith.
You guys.
Aleswith with the praise hymns.
Praise him. Sarah and I do that a lot to each other. Do we just like...
Oh, yeah. We love it.
Yeah. We'll send a little message. Praise him.
Random praise hymns.
Yeah. Poor Brita. So, but Brita, she'll fight back. Fierce. She's feisty, and she's going to keep fighting as a Dane because she is not going to be controlled. It's her personality type. She is all about the Dane way of life, and it suits her. And she thinks, she wants that for Uhtred. She wants that to be his life too. And she thinks Alfred is using Uhtred. I think he even says, like, I'm going to use him or something. I don't remember. But And she even says, like, she can't understand because she'll say to Uhtred, you don't owe him. Your promise doesn't mean anything because you're a pagan. And she's seeing a promise as something like, maybe like I swear on the Bible, or I swear to God, I'll do this for you. That kind of stuff would mean the promise. But she's like, we're not of that. So she's not seeing that Uhtred is actually making this promise from like his soul, like his heart. Like this is him as a person, not for his religion. He's like, I'm a man of my word, basically. And she can't understand that. She also can't understand why the Danes and the Saxons are so different, why they're so different from the Saxons. And we see that when they are in prison at the very beginning because they weren't sure if they trusted Brita and Uhtred of their insider information they gave. And she's like, why aren't they celebrating? Because they found out that the Saxons won. She's like, why are they so different from us? And obviously that's not the only thing she's observed of why they're different. And Uhtred, like, with his little, I don't know, it's kind of, you would miss this too, but he's like, it's God's wish, because he's going off of what...
Got to get that dig
yeah,
in there.
What the Saxons would say. Well, this was because of God. But here it is, the theme of God, God manipulating or is man manipulating, and it's a struggle, law and grace. And Brita and Uhtred see the difference, and Brita's going to use the Danes to get what she wants, and Uhtred is going to use the Saxons to get what he wants. Really.
Yeah. Brita just doesn't understand why Uhtred won't come with her, why he is choosing to stay with these Saxons over the Danes. I mean, the Danes are way more fun.
So what are you thinking? We've lived this whole life this way. Why?
If he goes with the Danes, he can never be the Lord of Ebonburg. He will never get his land. And then he says that the quote just sums it all up perfectly when he says, Uhtred Ragnarsson can never be Uhtred of Bebbanburg. He's Uhtred of Bebbanburg.
I'm going to admit,
he is.
Until we started going through this and kind of taking our notes and figuring out what we were going to talk about, that was never stood out so strongly to me as when we were doing our rewatch and stuff, because that's like huge. I don't know how I missed it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, he noticed that long time ago. Yeah, Uhtred Ragnarsson can never be Uhtred of Bebbanburg. I was like, oh, that's deep. Go Uhtred.
Mm-hmm. Identity crisis.
Yes. Beocca, I want to talk about him too. And poor Brita, again, man, someday people are going to love her.
I don't know. She gets under their skin.
She does, man. She gets in there. But Beocca is like, there's one part where he's so irritated with her. He's like, I've got to go pray. I got to expunge these unholy thoughts against her, right? And he's going to go pray for the strength to forgive it. And he's got to be holy and righteous and obedient to God. And that's what stinks, because it's really just about, like we keep saying, the choices and consequences. You guys are going to get so tired of hearing that, but it is. It's it. And Beocca's trying to look righteous, right, for God's favor, but he's just justifying his thoughts and actions, and God's not asking for his obedience in that. He's asking for us to believe him, that he sent his son to die for us, and Christ's blood gives us a future of hope, of a heavenly destination someday. That's it right there. And it's not about being better than others, or trying to be good enough, or obedient enough, or holy enough to get God's favor. We play this. Sorry, I'm guilty. We play this game, and it's really us just trying to prove we're good and good enough, and that God will love us, and that other people will love and accept us. But really, we're just serving ourselves in that way.
Yeah. Totally. Now I do think we can ask for God's strength.
Okay.
And we do ask for God's strength. We do pray for strength, but it's not the strength to obey.
Okay.
It's the strength to just be continually reminded that this life on earth is hard. It is. It's so hard. It's miserable sometimes. But we can look forward to that promised eternal life that he has for us, that beautiful place that we're going to spend with God. It's that hope of that future is what really keeps us grounded. It's what helps us move forward every day. And, to some people, this might sound really stupid or crazy or ignorant. And because I can't prove it, I can't prove to you that God exists, or that the Bible is true, or that his promises are going to actually happen. I think it's just something we choose to believe. I choose to believe
Me
that
too.
Until something better comes along.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
And we've talked about this before, that as we've kind of studied through it, it makes the most sense to us. Mm-hmm. And we choose to put our faith in the God of the Bible, and specifically those words that he says that is for me. And I think this is where people get confused, is we have to know what he has promised to us today as the body of Christ, because there's a lot of different promises in the Bible to a lot of different people, and we need to know what promises are for what people, or we're going to get really confused.
That's the part. We are confused. Like, it's okay in this episode and today, we mix and match so often, right? Or we rely on something, or we think, we've talked about the relics, we've talked about all that. And I think in this episode, the characters, you can also, these are some things we pulled out that were sort of side notes, I guess, that you can see traditions and past methods and rituals that are from religious beliefs, whether the pagan or the Christian belief in this episode, that really aren't necessary for us anymore. And I think the hard part of this is it's set so long ago that we can feel like it's so close to Bible times, or that it is Bible times, because it's still the same time. We're living in the now, just like that, because it's after Christ's death and resurrection, right? That even in 866 AD, it's the same thing. But we look at it differently because there's no toilets.
Still the age of grace.
Yeah,
it's still grace.
Yeah. So I think so I'm just going to tell you some of the things, like when Brita's making the concoction, right, to see the future. That's a little ritual that is sort of part of their pagan culture. And this ceremony with Alfred getting crowned, it's very Catholic because you see the prayers, the chants. They use water for a cross on his body. So that, to me, a lot of that, when I was watching that scene, I was like, this is so not I'm not doing that now because of grace. And I know some people still do. Moving on. But Uhtred also, after Brita has done that little thing with her concoction and she goes to sleep and she has the dream and she wakes up and he's like, she's trying to talk about it with him. And he's like, it doesn't matter. The 3 spinners are what decide everything anyway. And that was kind of when the first I really looked into that. And the 3 spinners basically decide all of their destiny, even the gods that they talk about. The spinners decide that. Yeah. So they're like the top dog, I guess. I don't know.
So I guess we have all these, rituals and relics and traditions. And what I'm hearing is that I think we just use these things to feel that we have some sort of control over the outcomes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Over what our future looks like. So we think we're in control. But it's really all just about our basic needs and our fear. A lot of it's just fear, It's just that manipulation to get what we want because we fear that loss of control. And we want that, again, wealth and land and that easy life. Just like, the Danes want to be feared and they fear losing men, and the Saxons fear God. And they fear losing God because if they lose God, then they lose the blessings and they're going to lose his will and his favor. And that's just really control. Again, we all want that good life.
Yeah.
But do all those things, the relics and the rituals and the chants and, the blessings, is that really going to ensure that we're going to have a good life?
I don't know. Primitive brain.
Because not everyone has a good life.
Yeah.
It's not equal.
No.
Not everyone gets an easy life.
I know. No. And obviously God isn't doing this. It's us manipulating our idea and theology of God so we can get what we want and we still look good and holy and righteous. Right? And
Alfred.
Yeah, the Danes are pretty straightforward, I think. And some generally want good for all people, and some are extremely selfish, but they're straightforward about it. And the Saxons are a little different because I think they hide behind the theology. But some of them truly want good for all people, and some are so manipulative and selfish. And this is just life. This is humanity. And here we go. Grace. It's grace. It's grace. It's grace. It's grace. Grace lets us decide who to trust. We can be selfish and manipulative, but it's probably not going to end well with the consequences. Or we can be humble and loving, and in the end, get some comforting consequences. And the Saxons are so hidden, it's hard to see who's truly wanting the good for all people, like we said. And I think we can see that today. With the Christians, their intentions sometimes are really hidden behind this God's will theology. Here's my quotations. God's will. And it's hard to know who's being trustworthy. And we get into situations where Christian men or pastors do a lot of damage, and Christian women, I can leave it alone, but do a lot of damage in the name of God. And I think we need to get rid of this theology so we can see the truth and grace that allows us to do that.
Yeah. Right? Okay. So,
time for the question.
In this episode, who's saying grace? Who's saying grace, Rachel?
Athelwold.
No, we hate him. No.
Yes.
He's baptized in crotch water. No.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, Athelwold. Sorry, Harry.
Yeah, sorry, Harry. We love you. Speaking of which, side note, go Harry McIntyre's Instagram. It's so funny. You have to go follow him. Yeah, he's great.
It will make you love him. Even though we secretly hate him, we hate Athelwold, but we love Harry.
Yeah.
So go follow his Instagram. He's hilarious.
Very witty, very dry, and go back a little bit during, when we were all in lockdown. There's this series he did that is fantastic. So good. Okay, I'm going to say this may not be I may not like have a person. I mean, I kind of have a person who, for me, is he sort of got it, which sometimes that's what grace is for me. Like somebody's getting it. Does that make
The aha
sense?
moment.
Yeah, the aha moment. And so Leofric, I'm just gonna say, we see. Okay, Brita has chosen to go with the Danes. Uhtred is staying back. He's given his sword to Alfred, standing by his word for like a year, because that was the deal they made. And Leofric says to him, "We sell ourselves. It is what we do." Can we pause on that for a second? That's like, and I think that's the main thing.
What are you selling yourself for?
Yeah. What is it? And that's my life moment. Like, why do we do what we do? Why do we do this? Why do we?
Yeah.
The things that you sell out for.
The things that we sell ourselves for. Who are you? What's that identity that you, of all these characters that we've kind of gone through and talked about, which one do you identify with? What do you live for? What's your hope? What's your purpose? And what are you selling yourself for?
Yeah.
I think that's when grace comes in.
Thank you, Leofric, for bringing us home.
Bring us home.
Yeah.
We need to understand why we do what we do. Okay, text us, call us. We want to hear what you have to say.